Subtle Influence in Everyday Life, published by Veridian. Chapter 1. Most people believe influence is loud. They imagine persuasion as a dramatic speech, a clever argument, a charismatic leader commanding attention. They think influence looks like pressure, authority, or manipulation done in obvious ways. But in everyday life, real influence is usually quiet. It slips into conversations unnoticed. It hides inside tone, timing, posture, pauses, and assumptions. And because it is subtle, it is far more powerful. Every day, you are influenced more times than you realize. You choose one product instead of another. You agree with someone even when you initially felt uncertain. You hesitate before speaking your truth. You feel trust toward a stranger or resistance towards someone you barely know. These decisions rarely come from logic alone. They come from subtle signals your mind absorbs automatically, long before conscious thought catches up. Subtle influence is not about control. It is about direction. A slight nudge instead of a push. A suggestion instead of command. A feeling instead of an argument. It works because the human brain is designed to save energy. We rely on shortcuts, patterns, emotional cues, and social signals to navigate the world efficiently. Subtle influence speaks directly to these systems. Think about the last time you felt comfortable with someone almost instantly. They didn't persuade you with facts. They didn't try to impress you. Something about their presence felt right. Maybe they mirrored your pace of speech. Maybe they listened just a little more closely than expected. Maybe they paused before responding, making you feel heard. None of these things are dramatic, yet together they create trust. Now think about the opposite. Someone who made you uneasy without saying anything obviously wrong. Their words may have been polite, but their timing was off. Their smile didn't reach their eyes. They interrupted slightly too often. Again, subtle signals. Again, influence at work. This book is about learning to see those invisible forces clearly. Not to exploit people, but to understand how influence already shapes your life, and how to use it ethically, intentionally, and responsibly. Because whether you like it or not, you're already influencing others. Your silence influences. Your body language influences. The way you phrase a simple request influences. The only question is whether you're doing it unconsciously or with awareness. Subtle influence matters because everyday life is built on small interactions, not grand moments. It happens at home, at work, with friends, with strangers, in emails, in messages, in brief conversations that seem unimportant at the time. Yet these moments accumulate. Over time, they shape your relationships, your opportunities, your confidence, and your reputation. People who understand subtle influence tend to move through life with less friction. They are not necessarily louder or more dominant. Often, they are calmer. They know when to speak and when to wait. They know how to frame ideas so others feel ownership rather than pressure. They know how to create cooperation without force. Importantly, subtle influence is not manipulation when used correctly. Manipulation seeks to take something from someone without their awareness or consent. Subtle influence, at its best, aligns interests. It creates clarity. It reduces resistance. It helps people feel safe enough to say yes or no honestly. The ethical line is not in the technique itself, but in the intention behind it. Throughout this book, we will focus on influence that respects autonomy. Influence that improves communication rather than distorting it. Influence that builds trust instead of eroding it. That means understanding how people think and feel, not overriding their will. One reason subtle influence is so powerful is that it works even when people believe they are being rational. The brain often decides first and explains later. Emotions, context, and social cues shape decisions long before logic steps in to justify them. This is not a flaw. It is how humans have survived and cooperated for thousands of years. Modern life, however, moves faster than our awareness. Messages arrive instantly. Conversations happen under pressure. Attention is fragmented. In this environment, subtle cues carry even more weight. A single word can change the tone of an entire conversation. A pause can communicate confidence or uncertainty. A question can open a door or close it. Learning subtle influence is also about self-awareness. You cannot guide others effectively if you do not understand the signals you send. Many people sabotage themselves unintentionally. They speak too quickly when nervous. They over-explain when unsure. They soften their statements until their message disappears. These habits influence how others perceive and respond to them. This book will help you notice those patterns, not to judge yourself, but to gain choice. Influence is most effective when it is aligned with who you are, not when you perform a role that feels unnatural. The goal is not to become someone else. The goal is to become clearer. Another important idea we will explore is that resistance is often a signal, not an obstacle. When people resist, it usually means something feels unsafe, rushed, or imposed. Subtle influence does not fight resistance head-on. It dissolves it by addressing what is unspoken. Sometimes that means slowing down. Sometimes it means reframing. Sometimes it means simply listening longer than expected. You will notice that many influential people are not the ones who talk the most. They are the ones who create space. Space for others to think. Space for others to feel understood. Space for decisions to feel self-directed. This is not accidental. It is a skill. As you move through this book, you may start noticing influence everywhere. In advertisements, in negotiations, in friendships, in leadership, even in conflicts. You may also notice when influence is used poorly, when it creates pressure, confusion, or resentment. That awareness is a sign of growth, not cynicism. Each chapter will explore a different dimension of subtle influence as it appears in real life, not theories detached from experience, but patterns you can observe and practice immediately. You do not need special charisma. You do not need to be extroverted. You only need attention, patience, and intention. Subtle influence is not about winning. It is about alignment. When people feel respected, understood, and unpressured, influence happens naturally. When they feel pushed, judged, or rushed, resistance grows, even if they say yes on the surface. By the end of this book, you will not only recognize how influence works, you will feel it in your conversations, in your timing, in the way people respond to you differently, sometimes without knowing why. That is when you know you are practicing subtle influence correctly, when it feels almost invisible even to you. This is where we begin. Chapter 2. Most people assume influence begins with words. In reality, it starts long before the first sentence is spoken. It begins with perception. How someone feels in your presence is often decided within seconds, and those seconds are shaped by signals so quiet that the conscious mind barely registers them. This chapter is about those early moments, when influence is formed before logic has a chance to intervene. When two people meet, their brains are constantly asking silent questions. Is this person safe? Are they confident? Do they respect me? Do they belong in my world? None of these questions are answered by arguments or explanations. They are answered by posture, movement, eye contact, breathing, facial tension, and rhythm. The body speaks first, and the mind listens. One of the most underestimated aspects of subtle influence is calm. Calm is not the absence of energy. It is the presence of control. A calm person signals that they are not overwhelmed by the moment. This creates an unconscious sense of safety in others. People relax around calm individuals because calm suggests competence, stability, and self-trust. Even in high-pressure situations, the person who remains grounded tends to guide the emotional tone of the interaction. This does not mean being slow or passive. It means being deliberate. Small behaviors reveal this immediately. Rushing into speech, filling every silence, or overreacting to minor cues can signal insecurity without a single word being spoken. On the other hand, a brief pause before responding communicates thoughtfulness. A steady pace of movement suggests confidence. These are subtle, but they are powerful. Eye contact is another channel of influence that is often misunderstood. Too little eye contact can be read as avoidance or uncertainty. Too much can feel invasive or aggressive. The most influential eye contact feels natural and responsive. It comes and goes. It matches the emotional tone of the moment. When someone speaks and you listen with relaxed attention, maintaining eye contact at key moments, they feel acknowledged, not studied, not judged, seen. Mirroring plays a critical role here. Humans are wired to feel comfortable with those who resemble them. This does not require copying someone obviously. In fact, obvious mirroring creates discomfort. Subtle mirroring happens in tempo and tone. If someone speaks softly, lowering your volume slightly creates alignment. If they speak quickly with energy, increasing your pace a little meets them where they are. This alignment happens below awareness, yet it strongly influences rapport. Physical orientation also matters. Facing someone fully can signal engagement, but in some contexts it may feel confrontational. A slight angle often feels more collaborative, especially in conversations that involve disagreement or vulnerability. These micro adjustments send messages about intention. Are you here to connect or to dominate? The body answers that question before words ever do. One of the most common mistakes people make is trying to appear influential rather than being present. They focus on performance. They think about what to say next instead of listening. This internal distraction leaks outward. Others feel it. Influence weakens when attention is split. Presence, on the other hand, is felt immediately when you're fully with someone. They sense it even if they cannot explain why. Voice is another powerful yet subtle instrument, not the content of speech, but its texture. A slightly slower pace can communicate authority and composure. A steady tone suggests reliability. Frequent upward inflections at the end of statements can unconsciously signal uncertainty. None of these traits are flaws. They are habits, and habits can be adjusted once they are noticed. Silence deserves special attention. Silence is not emptiness. It is a signal. Many people fear silence and rush to fill it, assuming it creates awkwardness. In truth, silence often creates space. Space for reflection. Space for emotional processing. Space for the other person to step forward. Those who are comfortable with silence tend to lead interactions without force. They allow influence to emerge rather than imposing it. Another subtle factor is emotional congruence. When what you feel matches how you appear, people trust you more. Incongruence, saying one thing while signaling another, creates confusion and resistance. You do not need to hide your emotions, but you do need to be honest with yourself about them. Try and project confidence while feeling anxious often produces mixed signals. Grounding yourself first is more effective than pretending. Context also shapes early influence. A conversation in a crowded room carries different signals than one in a quiet space. Lighting, distance, background noise, all of these affect how messages are received. Influential people adapt unconsciously. They lean in when intimacy is needed. They step back when space is required. This sensitivity is not manipulation. It is awareness. It is important to understand that these subtle signals do not work in isolation. They combine into a general impression. You cannot fake one element and ignore the rest. True subtle influence comes from alignment between body, voice, attention, and intention. When these elements support each other, influence feels effortless. The good news is that you do not need to change your personality to improve this. You only need to reduce unnecessary noise. Slow down slightly. Breathe more deeply. Listen longer than feels required. Let your responses emerge instead of forcing them. These small shifts can dramatically change how people respond to you. As you practice noticing these early moments, you'll begin to sense when influence is forming and when it is slipping away. You will feel conversations settle instead of tighten. You will notice others opening up without being asked. This is not magic. It is the natural result of subtle alignment. Influence does not announce itself. It reveals itself through ease, through flow, through the absence of resistance. Chapter by chapter, we will continue uncovering these quiet forces that shape everyday life, often without our awareness, yet always with consequence. When you understand how influence begins, you stop chasing it. You allow it to happen. Chapter 3. If the first moments of influence are shaped by presence and perception, the next layer is shaped by expectation. Much of what people decide, feel, and agree with is guided not by what is said, but by what is assumed. Expectations act like invisible frames. They tell the mind how to interpret information before it arrives. And whoever sets the frame often guides the outcome without ever appearing to persuade. In everyday life, expectations are constantly being exchanged. When you begin a sentence with confidence, people expect clarity. When you hesitate, they expect uncertainty. When you ask a question in a certain way, you imply what kind of answer is appropriate. These signals are subtle, but the brain treats them seriously. It prefers consistency, and it adjusts its responses to match the frame it has been given. One of the simplest examples of expectation setting is the difference between asking and assuming. When you say, "Could you help me with this?" you invite a decision. When you say, "When you help me with this, it will only take a few minutes," you imply cooperation as a default. The second approach does not force agreement, but it gently guides the mind toward yes. Most people go along with expectations unless they have a strong reason not to. This is not about tricking anyone. It is about understanding that humans prefer smooth social interactions. Resisting an expectation requires effort. Accepting it feels easier, especially when the expectation feels reasonable and respectful. That is why subtle influence often works best when it aligns with what the other person already values or intends. Language plays a powerful role here, not through persuasion, but through structure. The order of words matters. The tone matters. Even the choice between if and when can shift how a situation feels. If we finish this implies uncertainty. When we finish this implies inevitability. Neither sentence forces an outcome, but each invites a different mental posture. Another important aspect of expectation is social proof. People constantly look to others to decide what is normal, acceptable, or wise. When something is framed as common or typical, resistance drops. Phrases like "most people find it's common to," or "usually what happens is," quietly guide behavior. The listener imagines themselves inside a group, and belonging feels safer than standing apart. Timing also influences expectations. Introducing an idea early makes it feel like part of the process rather than a late demand. When people feel something is sprung on them, resistance rises. When it feels anticipated, they adjust more easily. Influential people often prepare the ground before asking for anything directly. Expectations are not only external, they also shape how people see themselves. When you treat someone as capable, thoughtful, or trustworthy, they are more likely to act that way. This is not flattery. It is a subtle invitation. People tend to live up to the roles they feel are expected of them, especially when those expectations are expressed quietly and consistently. For example, saying, "I trust your judgment on this," does more than express confidence. It creates a self-image the other person is likely to protect. They will think more carefully, not because they are pressured, but because they want to stay aligned with how they are being seen. This is one of the most ethical and effective forms of influence available. Expectations also shape disagreements. When conflict is framed as a shared problem rather than opposing positions, cooperation increases. Saying, "We're probably seeing this from different angles," feels very different from "You're wrong about this." The first assumes mutual reasonableness. The second assumes conflict. The mind responds accordingly. Another subtle technique is pre-framing effort. When something is described as easy or manageable, people approach it with less resistance. When it is framed as difficult or exhausting, motivation drops. This does not mean lying about effort. It means choosing which aspect to highlight. Saying "this will take focus, but it's straightforward" feels very different from "this is going to be a long, hard process." One of the most powerful expectation signals is consistency. People want to appear consistent with their past actions and stated values. When you gently remind someone of who they believe themselves to be, you influence their future behavior. You've always been someone who follows through, invites follow through without demanding it. Again, subtle but effective. It is important to notice that expectations can also limit influence when used unconsciously. If you expect rejection, your tone changes. If you expect conflict, your body tightens. Others sense this and respond defensively, often confirming your expectation. This is not fate. It is feedback. Awareness allows you to interrupt the cycle. Mastering expectation does not mean controlling outcomes. It means creating environments where desired outcomes feel natural rather than forced. It means reducing friction, not increasing pressure. When expectations are aligned, decisions feel smoother, conversations feel easier, and influence feels mutual. As you move through your daily interactions, start listening for the frames being set by you and by others. Notice how small shifts change the emotional direction of a conversation. You will begin to see that influence often happens before the main point is even discussed. In the next chapters, we will explore how trust, timing, and emotional signals deepen this process. Influence grows layer by layer, quietly shaping everyday life. Chapter 4. Trust is a soil in which influence grows. Without it, even the most carefully chosen words fall flat. With it, very little needs to be said. In everyday life, trust is rarely built through grand promises or dramatic gestures. It is built through small, consistent signals that tell the nervous system again and again, "You are safe here." One of the most important truths about trust is that it is felt before it is explained. People often say they trust someone because they are competent, honest, or experienced. But those reasons usually come after the feeling has already formed. The feeling itself comes from subtle cues: reliability, emotional stability, and alignment between words and behavior. Consistency is the backbone of trust. When your reactions are predictable in a healthy way, people relax around you. This does not mean being boring or rigid. It means being emotionally reliable. If someone never knows whether you respond with warmth or irritation, they stay alert. Alertness is the enemy of influence. Relaxation allows openness. Small actions matter more than big declarations. Showing up on time. Remembering details from previous conversations. Following through on what you say, even when it is inconvenient. These behaviors quietly communicate respect. Over time, they accumulate into trust without ever being announced. Another subtle trust signal is how you handle mistakes, yours and others. People who deflect blame or become defensive when corrected create distance. People who acknowledge errors calmly create safety. When you say, "You're right, I missed that," you are not losing status. You are gaining credibility. You show that the truth matters more to you than your ego. Listening is often described as a communication skill, but it is also a trust signal. Real listening is not waiting to speak. It is allowing someone to finish their thought without interruption, even when you disagree. It is reflecting back what you heard, not to manipulate, but confirm understanding. When people feel heard accurately, their guard lowers. Trust is also built through boundaries. This may sound counterintuitive, but unclear boundaries create anxiety. When people do not know what is acceptable or expected, they hesitate. Clear, calm boundaries signal self-respect and reliability. Saying no respectfully, without over-explaining, often increases trust rather than reducing it. Tone plays a crucial role here. A boundary delivered with calm confidence feels stable. A boundary delivered with apology or aggression creates uncertainty. Influence is not about pleasing everyone. It is about being consistent enough that others know where they stand with you. Another overlooked element of trust is pacing. Rushing intimacy, emotional or professional, can feel invasive. Trust grows in proportion to shared experience over time. Influential people respect this rhythm. They do not force closeness. They allow it to develop naturally. When someone feels they're choosing to trust you, that trust is stronger. Vulnerability, when used appropriately, deepens trust. This does not mean oversharing or emotional dumping. It means being real, admitting uncertainty, acknowledging fear or doubt when it is relevant. This signals humanity. It tells others they do not need to perform perfection around you. However, vulnerability must be grounded. Uncontained emotion can shift the burden onto the listener. Grounded vulnerability invites connection without demanding caretaking. There is a difference between saying, "This is important to me and I'm a little nervous," and emotionally collapsing into someone. The first builds trust. The second strains it. Fairness is another quiet trust builder. When people see that you treat others consistently, even when they are not present, they feel safer with you. Gossip, manipulation, or favoritism erode trust quickly, even if they seem beneficial in the short term. People assume that how you treat others is how you will eventually treat them. Trust is also shaped by how you respond to power. If you have authority, using it lightly builds trust. If you seek authority, demanding it destroys trust. Influence flows more easily toward those who do not need to assert dominance to be taken seriously. One of the strongest trust signals is allowing others to maintain dignity. Correcting someone privately instead of publicly. Disagreeing without humiliation. Giving credit where it is due. These actions may seem small, but they are remembered. Dignity is closely tied to trust because it touches identity. It is worth noting that trust is not blind. Healthy trust includes discernment. You do not need to reveal everything or accept everything to be trustworthy. In fact, selective trust often feels safer than indiscriminate openness. People trust those who are thoughtful about trust itself. When trust is present, influence feels effortless. Requests are met with consideration instead of suspicion. Feedback is received instead of defended against. Silence is not awkward. It is comfortable. This is not because people agree with you on everything, but because they believe in your intent. As you move forward, pay attention to the small moments where trust is built or weakened. These moments rarely stand out, but they shape everything that follows. Influence does not start with persuasion. It starts with safety. In the next chapter, we will explore how emotion, often dismissed as irrational, quietly guides decisions and behavior every day. Chapter 5. Emotion is often treated as the enemy of reason, something to control or ignore when making decisions. In reality, emotion is the engine that drives most choices. Reason usually arrives later, to justify what has already been decided. Subtle influence works not by overwhelming emotion, but by understanding how emotional currents move beneath the surface of everyday interactions. Every conversation has an emotional direction, even when the topic seems neutral. A discussion about schedules, finances, or logistics still carries feelings. Urgency, relief, tension, curiosity, boredom. These feelings shape how information is received. Two people can hear the same words and walk away with completely different reactions because their emotional states were different at the moment of hearing. One of the most influential skills you can develop is emotional awareness. This does not mean becoming overly analytical or emotionally intense. It means noticing shifts, when energy rises or drops, when someone becomes more guarded or more open, when enthusiasm fades or resistance appears. These shifts are signals, not problems. People often try to push through emotional resistance with logic. They add more explanations, more facts, more pressure. This usually backfires. When emotion is ignored, it does not disappear. It hardens. Subtle influence takes the opposite approach. It slows down and acknowledges emotional reality without making it dramatic. Simple phrases can do this powerfully. It sounds like this is frustrating. I get why you'd be hesitant. This feels important to you. These statements do not agree or disagree. They recognize. Recognition alone often reduces resistance because people feel less alone with their experience. Emotional labeling works because it engages the part of the brain responsible for regulation. When a feeling is named accurately, its intensity often decreases. The person feels seen instead of judged. This creates space for movement. Influence flows more easily when people are not busy defending their emotions. Another key principle is emotional contrast. People respond not only to what they feel, but to how it changes. Relief feels stronger after tension. Calm feels deeper after stress. Hope feels brighter after doubt. Influential communication often guides emotional transitions rather than trying to hold one emotion indefinitely. For example, allowing a moment of seriousness before offering reassurance makes the reassurance feel more credible. Acknowledging difficulty before presenting a solution makes the solution feel earned. Skipping straight to positivity can feel dismissive, even if the intention is good. Tone is critical here. Emotion is carried less by words and more by how they are delivered. A calm, steady tone can ground a tense conversation. A warm tone can soften difficult feedback. A neutral tone can de-escalate conflict. These effects happen automatically, without conscious effort from the listener. It is also important to understand that people protect their emotions. When someone feels exposed or vulnerable, they may become defensive, sarcastic, or withdrawn. These reactions are not personal attacks. They are protective strategies. Responding to them with force increases distance. Responding with steadiness and respect often dissolve them. Emotional influence is strongest when it feels voluntary. People resist being told how to feel, but they're open to being guided. Asking reflective questions invites emotional processing without pressure. What feels most important to you about this? What concerns you the most? These questions shift attention inward, where influence is more sustainable. One subtle emotional signal that often goes unnoticed is relief. When you remove uncertainty, confusion, or unspoken tension, people feel relief, and relief builds trust. Clear explanations, honest expectations, calm answers to difficult questions. These reduce cognitive and emotional load. People gravitate toward those who make things feel lighter, even when the topic is serious. Emotions are also contagious. Nervous energy spreads. Calm energy spreads. Enthusiasm spreads. You do not need to convince people to feel something. You only need to regulate yourself. Your emotional state becomes a reference point for others, especially in uncertain situations. This is why self-regulation is foundational to influence. If you cannot manage your own emotional reactions, you will struggle to guide anyone else's. This does not mean suppressing emotion. It means staying present with it, without letting it take over your behavior. Another subtle emotional factor is hope. People move toward what feels possible. When conversations highlight options instead of limitations, agency increases. Hope does not require false optimism. It requires honesty combined with possibility. This won't be easy, but there are ways forward feels more empowering than either denial or pessimism. At the same time, fear must be handled carefully. Fear can motivate, but it can also paralyze. Subtle influence does not amplify fear unnecessarily. It acknowledges risks without dramatizing them. It pairs awareness with support. This keeps fear informative rather than overwhelming. As you become more emotionally attuned, you will notice that influence often happens in moments of emotional shift, when tension softens, when clarity replaces confusion, when someone exhales. These are signs that resistance is lowering and openness is increasing. In the next chapter, we will explore how timing and patience, often underestimated, can amplify or destroy influence. Emotion sets the direction, but timing determines whether the door is open or closed. Chapter 6. Timing is one of the quietest forms of influence and also one of the most decisive. The same words, spoken at the wrong moment, can create resistance. Spoken at the right moment, they can feel obvious and welcome. Most people focus on what to say. Influential people pay equal attention to when to say it and when not to. Every interaction has a rhythm. There are moments when people are open and moments when they are closed. These states are not permanent. They shift based on energy, context, emotion, and attention. Subtle influence is about sensing these shifts and aligning with them rather than pushing against them. One of the clearest signs of poor timing is the urge to convince. When you feel the need to push, explain more, or accelerate agreement, it is often a signal that the moment is not right. Pushing rarely creates openness. It usually creates defense. Patience, on the other hand, often creates its own momentum. Silence plays a powerful role in timing. Many people interrupt the natural flow of influence by speaking too soon. They answer questions before they are fully asked. They fill pauses that could have allowed reflection. These interruptions are usually driven by discomfort, not intention. Yet they weaken influence by removing space. Allowing a pause after making a point gives the other person time to process. It signals confidence in what was said. It also invites participation rather than compliance. When people are given space, they often move themselves in the direction you hope for, and when they do, the influence is stronger because it feels self-generated. Timing is also about readiness. People need to feel ready to receive information, feedback, or requests. Readiness is shaped by emotional state, mental load, and perceived safety. Try to influence someone who is overwhelmed or distracted is like speaking into noise. The message may be heard, but it will not land. This is why checking in matters. A simple "is now a good time" does more than ask for permission. It creates psychological readiness. The mind shifts from reactive to receptive. Even when the answer is yes, the question itself improves the quality of attention. Another subtle aspect of timing is sequencing. Influential communication often follows a natural order. Connection first, then content. Jumping straight into demands or opinions without establishing connection feels abrupt. A brief moment of acknowledgement, "I know you've had a lot on your plate," can dramatically change how the rest of the conversation is received. Timing also applies over longer periods. Not all influence happens in a single conversation. Sometimes the most effective move is to plant a seed and step back. An idea introduced gently may take time to grow. When it reappears later, it feels familiar rather than foreign. Familiarity reduces resistance. People often underestimate the power of repetition spaced over time. Hearing something once can feel like pressure. Hearing it again later in a different context can feel like confirmation. This is not manipulation. It is how understanding develops. Patience is closely linked to respect. When you rush someone toward a decision, you imply that your timeline matters more than their process. When you allow time, you communicate trust in their judgment. Ironically, this often speeds things up. People are more willing to move when they do not feel pushed. Another timing mistake is addressing the wrong layer of a problem first. If emotional concerns are present, logical arguments will bounce off. If trust is weak, requests will feel risky. Influential timing means addressing foundational layers before surface issues. This requires listening more than speaking. Context matters too. Public versus private settings change how messages are received. Feedback given privately preserves dignity and increases receptivity. Requests made at the end of a conversation often feel heavier than those made in the middle, when rapport is strongest. These are small adjustments, but they compound. There's also the timing of restraint. Knowing when not to influence is as important as knowing how. Not every moment requires guidance, correction, or persuasion. Sometimes allowing people to experience the consequences of their choices builds more learning than intervening. Subtle influence respects autonomy. It does not rush growth. It aligns with natural readiness rather than forcing outcomes. This approach may seem slower on the surface, but it is more durable. Decisions made at the right time tend to last. As you become more sensitive to timing, you will feel less pressure to act immediately. You will trust that influence unfolds. Conversations will feel less strained. Outcomes will feel more mutual. In the next chapter, we will explore how subtle influence operates in everyday language through word choice, framing, and implication, often without anyone noticing at all. Chapter 7. Language is the most visible tool of influence, yet its most powerful effects are often invisible. It is not the obvious arguments or dramatic phrases that shape decisions, but a quiet structure of everyday words. How something is said matters more than what is said, because language does not only carry information, it carries direction. In daily conversation, people rarely analyze sentences logically. They respond to how the language makes them feel. Certain words create openness, others create resistance. Often, this happens without conscious awareness. Subtle influence lives in these small linguistic choices. One of the most influential shifts you can make is moving from commands to invitations. Even when authority is present, language that invites cooperation feels safer than language that demands it. Compare "you need to do this" with "let's look at how we can do this." The second phrase implies partnership. The mind relaxes when it feels included rather than ordered. Questions are especially powerful because they direct attention. When you ask a question, you temporarily take control of what the other person thinks about. This is not coercion, it is focus. Open-ended questions invite exploration. Narrow questions invite decisions. Reflective questions invite insight. The influence comes from where attention is placed. For example, "Why haven't you done this?" points attention toward failure and defense. "What got in the way?" points attention toward explanation and problem solving. The difference is subtle, but the emotional impact is significant. Another quiet influence tool is presupposition. Some sentences contain assumptions that the listener unconsciously accepts. Saying, "What do you think is the best next step?" assumes there will be a next step. Saying, "When would you like to start?" assumes willingness. These assumptions are not forceful. They simply guide the mind toward a certain frame. Softening language can also increase influence, but only when done with confidence. Phrases like, "it might be worth considering," or "one option could be reduce pressure." However, overusing softeners can signal uncertainty. The key is balance, gentle language supported by steady tone. Certainty is communicated less by strong words and more by calm delivery. A simple statement spoken slowly and clearly often carries more weight than dramatic language spoken quickly. Influence grows when words and tone are aligned. Another subtle technique is contrast framing. How you place information next to other information changes how it is perceived. A small request after a larger one feels easier. A reasonable option next to an extreme one feels safer. This does not require deception. It requires awareness of context. Metaphors also shape understanding. They translate abstract ideas into emotional experience. Describing a project as a foundation feels different from describing it as a gamble. Each metaphor carries emotional implications that guide decisions. Influential communicators choose metaphors carefully, often unconsciously. Negatives deserve special attention. The mind tends to focus on what is named, even when it is negated. Saying "don't worry" often makes people think about worry. Saying "you're in good hands" directs attention towards safety instead. Framing toward what you want felt or done is more effective than framing against what you want avoided. The word "because" is another quiet influencer. People are more likely to agree when a reason is given, even if the reason is simple. "Could you help me with this because it will make the process smoother?" feels more complete than a request without explanation. The brain likes coherence. Names and personal references also increase influence. Using someone's name lightly signals attention and recognition. Referencing past conversations shows continuity. People feel valued when they feel remembered. That feeling often translates into cooperation. One of the most powerful language habits is summarizing. When you reflect back what someone has said in your own words, you demonstrate understanding. This reduces the need for them to repeat or defend themselves. Influence increases because the emotional temperature drops. It is also important to notice filler language. Excessive qualifiers, apologies, or justifications can weaken a message. Sorry, but I just think maybe we could dilute intent. Removing unnecessary fillers does not make you harsh. It makes you clear. Clarity is attractive. People are drawn to those who make things easier to understand. When your language reduces confusion, you become a point of stability. Stability invites trust, and trust invites influence. As you become more aware of your language, you will notice how small adjustments change responses. Conversations will feel smoother. Requests will feel lighter. Disagreements will feel less charged. In the next chapter, we will look at how influence shows up in boundaries, power, and quiet leadership, especially when no one is officially in charge. Chapter 8. Influence is often confused with power, but they are not the same. Power is usually granted by position, title, or control over resources. Influence can exist with or without those things. In everyday life, some of the most influential people are not the loudest, the highest ranking, or the most visible. They lead quietly, through boundaries, presence, and self-respect. One of the clearest signs of quiet influence is how a person handles boundaries. Boundaries communicate value, both your own and others. When boundaries are weak, people feel uncertainty. When boundaries are aggressive, people feel threatened. When boundaries are calm and clear, people feel stability. Stability invites trust. A boundary does not need to be explained at length to be valid. Over-explaining often signals doubt. A simple, respectful statement delivered without apology carries weight. I can't take this on right now. That doesn't work for me. I need more time to decide. These sentences are not confrontational. They are grounded, and grounding is influential. Interestingly, people often respect boundaries more when they are delivered without emotional charge. Anger invites pushback. Excessive softness invites negotiation. Calm certainty invites acceptance. This does not mean people will always like your boundary, but they are more likely to accept it. Quiet leaders also understand when not to step in. They resist the urge to correct every mistake or control every outcome. This restraint communicates trust in others' competence. When people feel trusted, they rise to meet that trust. Influence grows because it is not imposed. Another subtle aspect of influence without authority is how you respond to pressure. People who fold immediately under pressure lose credibility. People who react aggressively create resistance. People who pause, consider, and respond thoughtfully project strength. That strength is often felt more than seen. Presence matters here. Standing or sitting comfortably. Taking up an appropriate amount of space without dominating. Speaking when you have something to say, not to fill silence. These behaviors signal self-assurance. Others take cues from that assurance. Influence is also shaped by how you handle disagreement. Quiet influence does not require winning arguments. It requires maintaining connection while holding your position. Phrases like, "I see it differently," or "That's not how I understand it," keep the conversation open. They assert without attacking. Allowing others to save face is another mark of subtle leadership. When someone is wrong, correcting them in a way that preserves dignity maintains influence. Public embarrassment may win a moment, but it loses long-term trust. Influential people choose effectiveness over ego. Power dynamics are present in every interaction, even informal ones. Being aware of them allows you to soften unnecessary hierarchies or strengthen your presence when needed. For example, sitting beside someone instead of across can reduce perceived opposition. Inviting input can redistribute power in a group setting. Another quiet signal of influence is predictability under stress. When situations become tense, people look for emotional anchors. The person who remains steady becomes that anchor. Others begin to orient around them, often unconsciously. Influence without authority also comes from contribution. People who consistently add value, clarity, insight, support, earn informal leadership. Others seek their opinion not because they must, but because it helps. This kind of influence is durable because it is based on usefulness, not control. It is important to understand that boundaries protect influence. When you say yes to everything, your yes loses meaning. When your no is rare and thoughtful, it carries weight. Scarcity applies not only to resources, but to attention and agreement. Respect for others' boundaries also strengthens your influence. When people see that you do not pressure, guilt, or overstep, they feel safer around you. Safety encourages openness. Openness allows influence to flow naturally. Quiet leadership does not announce itself. It is recognized over time. People begin to listen more closely. They check in with you. They adjust their behavior slightly when you are present. These are signs that influence is working, even if no one names it. In the next chapter, we will explore how subtle influence plays out over time, how consistency, reputation, and small patterns shape long-term outcomes in everyday life. Chapter 9. By this point, it should be clear that subtle influence is not a set of tricks. It is a way of moving through life. And one of the places where this becomes most visible is in how influence shapes your identity over time. Not how you see yourself, but how others experience you consistently, often without being able to explain why. People do not respond to isolated behaviors. They respond to patterns. A single calm reaction is nice. A pattern of calm reactions becomes leadership. A single moment of clarity is helpful. A pattern of clarity becomes authority. Over time, subtle influence turns into expectation, and expectation turns into reputation. Reputation is not something you declare. It is something others build quietly in their minds based on repeated exposure. You may think of yourself as kind, thoughtful, or reliable, but what truly matters is whether others feel that way after interacting with you again and again. Influence grows strongest when intention and perception align. One of the most powerful long-term influence patterns is emotional consistency. This does not mean being emotionally flat. It means being proportionate. When your reactions match the situation, people feel grounded around you. Overreacting creates instability. Underreacting creates distance. Appropriate reaction builds trust over time. Another important pattern is how you handle uncertainty. Life is full of ambiguity, and people look for cues on how to respond to it. If you panic, others panic. If you deny uncertainty, others feel uneasy. If you acknowledge uncertainty calmly, others feel steadier. Over time, you become someone people trust when things are unclear. Influence also accumulates through how you handle other people's influence. When you are open to being influenced yourself, people feel respected. Stubbornness disguised as strength repels. Flexibility paired with discernment attracts. Saying, "I hadn't thought of it that way," is not weakness. It signals confidence and intellectual honesty. Long-term influence is strengthened by generosity of interpretation. When you assume good intent unless proven otherwise, interactions soften. This does not mean being naive. It means not defaulting to suspicion. People sense when they are being interpreted charitably, and they tend to respond in kind. Another subtle pattern people notice is how you speak about those who are not present. Respect in absence builds trust and presence. Criticism behind closed doors creates quiet fear. People wonder what you say about them when they leave. Influence weakens when fear enters the picture. Your relationship with time also shapes influence. People who are always rushed create pressure. People who manage time well create ease. This ease becomes associated with you. Others feel less hurried, less reactive, more thoughtful when interacting with you. Over time, this emotional association becomes powerful. Influence also grows when you allow others to shine, giving credit freely, stepping back when someone else deserves the spotlight, and supporting without needing recognition builds deep loyalty. People remember who made them feel capable and respected. That memory lasts. One of the most underestimated aspects of long-term influence is restraint in storytelling. Oversharing, exaggeration, or constantly positioning yourself as a hero erodes credibility. Measured self-disclosure feels grounded. It suggests self-knowledge and confidence. Over time, subtle influence shapes not only how people respond to you, but how they behave around you. Conversations become more honest. Conflict becomes less dramatic. Decisions feel less forced. This is not because you control people, but because you create conditions where people can think clearly. Eventually, influence becomes quiet momentum. You do not need to persuade as much. Your presence already carries context. People assume competence, fairness, and steadiness. These assumptions were not demanded. They were earned. In the final chapter, we will step back and look at the full picture, how subtle influence, practiced ethically and consciously, becomes a way of living that reduces resistance, deepens relationships, and creates a sense of quiet power in everyday life. Chapter 10. Subtle influence is not something you switch on and off. By the time you reach the end of this book, it should be clear that it is already happening. Through your presence, your timing, your tone, your emotional state, and the patterns you repeat day after day. The difference now is awareness. And awareness changes everything. Most people try to force outcomes. They push conversations, rush decisions, argue harder, explain more. They believe influence comes from effort. What subtle influence reveals is the opposite. The less force you use, the more room influence has to work. When people feel unpressured, they think more clearly. When they feel respected, they open up. When they feel safe, they move willingly. Throughout these chapters, one idea has appeared again and again in different forms. Resistance is information. It is not an enemy. When something does not land, when tension appears, when someone pulls back, it is a signal that a layer has been skipped. Maybe trust is missing. Maybe emotion was ignored. Maybe timing was wrong. Subtle influence listens to these signals instead of fighting them. Another central theme is alignment. Influence works best when your inner state, your behavior, and your language point in the same direction. When they do not, people sense a mismatch, even if they cannot name it. This is why authenticity matters, not as a moral concept, but as a practical one. Congruence reduces friction, and congruence creates it. Ethics matter here more than many people realize. Techniques can be copied, words can be learned, but intention always leaks through. When influence is used to extract, people may comply temporarily, but trust erodes. When influence is used to align, trust compounds. Over time, this difference becomes obvious in the quality of your relationships and the ease of your interactions. Subtle influence also changes how you experience yourself. When you stop forcing, you stop feeling desperate for control. When you trust timing, you feel less anxious. When you communicate clearly and calmly, you feel more grounded. Influence, practiced well, reduces internal tension as much as external resistance. You may notice that as you apply these ideas, people respond differently to you in small ways. They interrupt you less. They listen more closely. They explain themselves more openly. They seem more willing to cooperate without being asked directly. These changes are easy to dismiss, but they are signs that influence is working quietly in the background. It is important to remember that subtle influence is not about always getting your way. Sometimes the most influential outcome is a clean no, delivered without drama. Sometimes it is a pause instead of a push. Sometimes it is choosing not to influence at all. Power lies in choice, not control. Over time, subtle influence becomes less about strategy and more about character. How you regulate yourself. How you treat others when nothing is at stake. How you behave when no one is watching. These moments shape your long-term impact far more than any single conversation. If there is one principle to carry forward, it is this. People move toward those who make life feel clearer, calmer, and more dignified. If your presence reduces confusion, lowers emotional noise, and preserves dignity, influence will follow naturally. You do not need to chase it. Subtle influence does not announce itself. It does not demand recognition. It works in the background, shaping choices, relationships, and opportunities in ways that feel organic rather than forced. When practiced with awareness and respect, it becomes a quiet form of power, one that improves not only what you achieve, but how you live. And that is the true value of subtle influence in everyday life.